So I will call this meeting of the Executive Committee of Silicon Valley Clean Energy to order. And all meetings are conducted in accordance with the Governor's Executive Order N2920. And members of the public may observe the meeting electronically by accessing the meeting via instructions above or on your notice, I believe. Oh, so sorry. Public comments can be sent in advance of the meeting to the board clerk and will be read within the public comment period or the applicable agenda item. The public will also have an opportunity to provide comments during the meeting. The public may provide comment on any matter listed on the agenda. Speakers are customarily limited to 3 minutes. However, the committee chair may increase or decrease the time allotted to each speaker based on the number of speakers, the length of the agenda, and the complexity of the subject matter. Speakers' times will not be decreased to less than 1 minute. If you are an individual with a disability and need reasonable modification or accommodations pursuant to the American with Disabilities Act, contact the board clerk, Andrea Pisano, at svccleanenergy.org prior to the meeting. So hopefully we don't have that problem. And with that, Madam Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Chair Gibbons.
Here.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Here.
Elahi.
Here.
Abekoga.
Here.
Thank you. And I will note that Director Flagger is currently absent, but we do have a quorum of the committee.
Thank you. And she'll join us if she can. This is the portion of the meeting where we would accept public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. The public may provide comments on any matter not on the agenda, and but within our jurisdiction of Silicon Valley Clean Energy, speakers are customarily limited to 3 minutes, and speaking time will not be decreased to less than 1 minute. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone wishing to speak at this point?
No, Chair, we do not have any hands raised from the public to speak.
Thank you. And with that, we will move on to the consent calendar. And is there any comment, correction, or otherwise? The chair would consider approving the minutes of the March 26th Executive Committee meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Director Elahi. May I have a second by Director Tyson?
That's right.
Thank you. If there's no comments from the public or others, we will have a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Gibbons.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Yes.
Elahi.
Yes.
Abekoga.
Aye.
Thank you. And that carries with Director Flagger absent.
Thank you. And we will now go to the regular calendar, which has our CEO update. And this is a discussion item for the board. Mr. CEO.
Yep. Thank you, Chair Gibbons. I'm actually going to keep this very short because we have many items on the agenda. So I've shared with you some in past meetings on issue spotting and priorities. Those remain the same. So we are gearing up towards preparing for our budget season, etc. So we have the next couple of months are going to be quite busy with bringing you potentially another wind energy contract in May, which we will discuss with the Risk Oversight Committee prior to bringing it in. And then we'll have meetings in May and June, and then we're taking July off. And then, of course, August, September, we'll get back into the budget in earnest. So we'll start talking about the budget in June. So a lot coming up, and you'll just see from the items, at least 2 of the items today, there are other issues, including utility COVID debt that need to be addressed. And we'll address other issues on the legislative front. For example, SB 612. We have Benna Chang, happy to announce that she is now an employee as of this Monday. We'll introduce her to the board at the next board meeting. but she's hit the ground sprinting and asking for all your assistance support for SB 612, which is the PCIA bill. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions on what I've said so far, or any other issues that are maybe operational in nature.
I would just offer that we've been in contact, and Campbell has a setup where we have a legislative subcommittee, and the subcommittee can meet on an ad hoc basis. And so we are probably submitting today a letter of support for SB 612.
Thank you so much. It's fantastic. Fantastic. We're going to need all the help we can to get it past that committee, the first committee.
Good. If there's no other comments on the executive director's reports, we will close that discussion item and move to item number 3, which is the California Community Power Authority policies update.
Thank you. And Andrea will share slides and go to slide 2. So we updated the executive committee on this at the last meeting. As background, we have just started this agency called CC Power. We conducted our third meeting on Wednesday, third board meeting on Wednesday. And at the first board meeting, we had several stakeholders from the labor community and environmental community approach CC Power requesting a number of broad policies they wanted us to consider and to adopt. We created an ad hoc committee of the CC Power board to engage with the stakeholder groups, and the ad hoc committee, along with the interim general manager of CC Power, have had several meetings. So just again, in terms of background and where we are at CC Power, on Wednesday, the board approved Clean Power San Francisco, which is the CCA from San Francisco, and Valley Clean Energy, which surrounds Davis. And you can see that on the map to the right. We approved them as new members 2 days ago. So we are also in the process of hiring the next interim GM and general counsel. We are interviewing for that for general counsel, and our own GC, Greg Stepanisic, is helping me with that. I'm on that ad hoc committee to hire these folks. So let's go to the next slide. Since we met with you last month, the ad hoc committee has met with these groups and essentially shared what the ad hoc committee was proposing. There was lots of back and forth. There was one face-to-face meeting. I believe there are at least 14 representatives of labor and environmental organizations. And the board considered a modification to the recommendations to these policies, and they limited it just to the long duration storage project. Given that we only have one project in place, it was the board basically wanted to focus on that. So essentially, we have what's known as enhanced project conditions that will be applied towards a long duration project. So at the meeting itself, there were additional changes requested by advocates, and the board spent quite a bit of time redlining the resolution. You know how much fun it is to redline resolutions during a meeting, but it behooved us to do that because we are moving forward with a long duration storage project and we need clarity on that. Also mentioned to you, there was another thing that we added, and this did not come from stakeholders, but it came from the CC Power board, which is we would be asking for non-disparagement language to be included in project labor agreements. We basically, we also saw a letter that was sent by IBW 1245 to the city of Stockton, which had many statements in there that were very negative to CCAs. I'll just tell you the last line of that letter says there's a long history of broken promises coming from CCAs and their advocates. It was a very strongly written letter. And so we thought that we need to partner with labor and we need to have a very open and productive relationship. So that was also adopted, and broader policies around CC Power as a whole will be developed later, given we only have one project, and that project is going to hopefully result in a contract by the end of the calendar year. We don't have to develop the broader policies right now. So, and we're going to be changing general managers too, very shortly. In 2 months, the current interim general manager is going to retire and we'll have another person. You can go to the next slide. This is a slide when you think about CCAs across California, we have been signing up contracts for purchase power agreements all over the state. And several of those projects do have project labor agreements, and some even without project labor agreements utilizes labor. And this is a list of the different local unions that are working with CCA or working on CCA projects. So you can see that it's a very wide variety of labor unions that we have existing relationships with. And our own projects are also embedded in here. We just haven't called them out. This is a Cal CCA slide that just got put together recently. So we really look forward to a continued strong relationship with labor and environmental organizations. And if I can go to the next slide, I'll just say that we are going to, next steps, we're going to shortlist, the board will shortlist projects in May and negotiate project agreements. And we hope to bring it back to this board the end of the third quarter or sometime in the fourth quarter. So this is an information update at this point. I don't have anything else. I'll be open to answer any questions you may have.
I got muted. Director Elahi.
Yeah, thank you, Girish, for the report. It's a complicated thing to deal with labor. I was wondering if you had brought up any issue with, or if that's appropriate, of labor supporting us on SB 612 or other PCI-related matters.
That's part of what Cal CCA has reached out to labor on that. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Make sure I can see everybody. Okay. I seen my question is somewhat what Director Elahi is. I am a little worried about the general conditions of language of the contracts for the organization. So I'll keep paying attention to that with your reporting. Is there anyone from the audience, participants who would like to speak on this item? I'll open the public hearing. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the committee for any final comments. If there are none, then
I just wanted to.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to follow up on that. These suppliers who are going to be supplying us the contracts, I guess the power purchase agreement, the sellers, do they generally employ labor and have unions already on their other projects?
Yes.
Or is this going to be a distraction for people
No.
that they don't want to bid on it because they're going to be subject to this particular agreement?
No, I think any utility scale project on the renewable side will have union labor. It can't really be built here without that skilled labor. And I'd say most of them, if not all of them, will use a PLA. So yeah, that shouldn't be really an issue. And I think there are competing studies actually on quality versus cost. And I've read a few of them, and I think having a PLA and having the skilled trades work on it, I think it's a very positive thing for us.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, this is a discussion item, so we will close item number 3 and move on to item number 4, COVID-related customer debt and delinquent payment policies. And I would encourage the board to look at this as an opportunity to really understand what the staff is presenting and feel free to make comments on how to clarify or support or answer any questions so that when they go to the board, there's a solid presentation that we're all comfortable with. So with that, who is going to make that? Garish, are you going to make that one?
Yeah, this and the next one will be Don Bray.
Where's Don?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
I'm yeah, I don't have the best connection, so if it's all right, I'd like to just stay on audio here. Yeah, thank you, Chair, for that introduction, and good afternoon, directors. As you know, we've seen a significant uptick in delinquent customer payments as a result of COVID. And as we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel now, we want to start to frame up our thinking for how and when we resume that, our historic delinquent payment policy, and deal with this, significant bubble of debt that we have at the moment. So we go to the next slide, please. So we're ultimately going to get to a few high-level options that we'd like to have you think through and provide us some direction on. But before we get to that, we want to take you through some appropriate background here in terms of what our delinquency policy was historically, how PG&E treated customers that were in arrears. We want to talk about what's happened to our debt statistics throughout COVID. We want to talk about PG&E's timeline for resuming noticing and service disconnections of customers for non-payment. There are several programs that are available to help deal with this, and we can describe those briefly. And then the CPUC is thinking about more in terms of programs to help with this. We'll talk briefly about what our goals are and some of the constraints that we deal with, and then we'll present these options. So I'll spin through these slides pretty quickly, just by way of background, and then we can get to the discussion at the end. So next slide, please. There may be a delay in the slides moving as I'm seeing them here, but if we are in fact on the, okay, here we go, on the next slide. So PG&E historically will and has the ability to disconnect customers if they don't pay. And the policy varies a little bit depending on the customer's risk level, but ultimately, if you're a couple of months in arrears, you will get a shut-off notice from PG&E, and then you'll get phone calls, and then you will be shut off. I think PG&E historically has gone to great lengths to not do that, and they will be lenient if customers pay partially or pay in some way. If a customer can go on a payment plan to work off the debt that they have over subsequent months, they won't do a disconnection. But ultimately, they will disconnect, and they have the power to do that. We don't. We cannot disconnect customers for not paying. Our historic policy has been, if a customer accrues quite a bit of debt with us and is behind in their payments, we will send notices to them, and if they don't correct that situation over the following couple of months, we return them to PG&E. In a sense, we opt them out. And this is a standard practice in the CCA community. It's really the only way that we can limit our exposure to non-paying customers. And in many cases, PG&E's policy will we'll be taking care of this problem before it becomes an issue for us. But there are actually ways that customer payments are applied that historically have favored PG&E, where PG&E gets to apply partial payments first. So we can be in a situation where PG&E may not be in arrears with a customer, but we may be because of partial payments. So that's really where this policy has stemmed from. Historically, we've returned on the order of 150 to 200 customers a month to PG&E for non-payment. In terms of where this policy has gone in the last 12 months or so, PG&E discontinued their disconnection policy last March, and at the same time, we discontinued our send back policy, if you will. So in terms of any sort of collection effort, everything really came to a stop with COVID, and it remains stopped as we speak. Next slide. So over the course of this last year, we've seen a really significant uptick in customer arrearage. Historically, in terms of customers that were more than 31 days in arrears, we saw an overall balance of about $2.5 million. That number has grown since last March to about 5.8 million. So we've seen an addition of about $3 to $3.5 million in customer debt that have resulted from COVID. In terms of customers, again, we typically saw on the order of 13,000 customers in this category, and now we're seeing about 21,000. So a 7,000 or 8,000 customer count increase in arrearage. Next slide, please. So the significant majority of the arrearage problem is residential. Almost 2/3 of the dollars we're owed from delinquent customers is from the residential sector. And we also have a very significant balance here, as you can see, of customers that are well past due. So now more than 210 days in arrears. So again, a significant bubble of past due dollars that are out there. Next slide, please. So in terms of how our residential customers that are significantly past due, more than 90 days past due, lay out, we have a table here that shows that if we were to immediately reinstitute our delinquent payment policy and send back customers that were more than 150 days past due, we would be facing a situation where we'd be sending back on the order of 6,000 residential customers, and about a third of those would be low-income qualified customers, CareFira customers. So this is just a number to remember to help frame the problem a bit. So we are looking at some big numbers. Again, historically, we had on the order of 150 to 200 sendbacks a month, and now we have this big bubble that we're looking at of several thousand. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, PG&E historically has had a disconnection policy. They put a moratorium on it last March. They're planning to end that moratorium as of June 30th. So in just another couple of months. And they've sent us quite a bit of information on this, but the upshot is the first customer disconnections that they would likely see would be as of mid-August for business customers and towards the end of August for residential customers. They're also going to begin to recertify CareFira income qualified customers as in fact being low income, they suspended that certification effort during COVID. So basically anyone could apply to become CARE-FIRA, in which case they can earn about a 20+% discount on their bill. And they could do that, and then they would have to apply for certification at the end of COVID. And that's what we're going to start to see this summer. Next slide, please. So in terms of payment plans and other debt forgiveness programs, at sort of the simplest level, if you can be income qualified as a CARE-FIRA customer, you do get 20 or up to 35% off of your bill. So there's been a big push through COVID to get people that are in need onto CARE-FIRA, and that continues. We have 29,000 CARE-FIRA customers, so approximately 12 or 13% of our residential customers are CARE-FIRA. You might recall from a couple of months ago, we enrolled SVCE in the Arrearage Management Program, or AMP for short.
Yep.
And we now have about 2,200, 2,300 qualifying customers for the AMP program, and about 280 that have enrolled. And this is a program where when you go on the program, and if you have, say, $1,000 that you owe, if you make payments, if you pay your utility bill that's current as of that month, then 1/12 of that $1,000 will be forgiven. And so over 12 months, you can, in a sense, work off any past debt if you're able to make your payments on a current basis. This is a really good program also because we get compensated for that. So this is debt that we have that will eventually be paid back for through a public purpose program and PG&E. So AMP is definitely something we want to encourage. There's also the old-fashioned payment plan, which is just giving customers the opportunity to, in a sense, finance the debt that they have and pay it off over a 12-month period. There's also one-time payment programs from third-party organizations. LIHEAP is a federal program, and REACH is a private nonprofit program, but these are $300-400 grants, in a sense, that customers can get if they're under the threat of being shut off. And then finally, the CPUC has opened a special relief proceeding, which is in process right now, and they're looking at possibly providing one-time forgiveness of up to $200 for residential or small business customers with balances greater than $1,000. They're also looking at expanding that payment plan that I described, that is typically no more than 12 months to 24 months, and allowing for some missed payments to happen, and for that payment plan to still be intact, which I think would be a very practical program. The decision on some of these elements is expected, a proposed decision on May 21st, and then a final decision by late June. Next slide, please. So in terms of our overall exposure, it's a difficult thing to estimate, of course. We will see some of this money paid back, but at the low end, we're probably facing additional exposure of about 1.2 million. That's if repayment matched the rate at which our debt has historically been repaid by customers. At the high end, if none of that COVID debt was collectible, we might be facing an additional 3.9 million. So the truth is probably going to be somewhere in the middle, of course. We have increased our allowance for bad debt to 1.5 million in our FY 2021 budget, from a level that's historically been about 500K. though. Historically, um, our non payment has been really quite low, but we have budgeted for a tripling of that this year. We've also, as you know, provided close to $3 million in credits to care fair customers, residential low-income customers, and to small business. So this situation would likely be worse if we hadn't done that. But as we look at this bubble of debt that we're facing, and the prospect of some of our customers facing shutoffs later in the summer, you know, we have been thinking about, gee, would it make sense to potentially allocate a bit more money to some sort of special program, probably not as broadly applied as what we did with the bill credits last year, but perhaps applied to customers most in need. We do have a bit of additional money in the customer relief program that we set up last year. The contingency, there was a couple million in contingency, as you may recall. So that may be a source of funding that we could draw from. All right, with all of that background, here were the three basic options that we wanted you to give us your thoughts on. And these, you know, there's sort of options at two poles and one in the middle, but at, you know, one level we could simply resume our historic arrearage policy, and for customers that that were significantly delinquent, say past 150 days, we
Next
could,
slide, please.
oh, I'm sorry, next slide, thank you. We could send them back. So that would be just straight up resuming our historic policy. And this would probably be in the July timeframe, right after PG&E resumes their policy. An additional option would be a phased or gradual resumption where
Sorry,
would,
Don,
yes,
sorry to interrupt. I think we're on the wrong slide. I think it should be the slide after this.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think it's not ordered, so we'll go to this one.
I'm sorry, and
Back
I'm dealing with a delay in the slides
No
here,
problem.
so I
It's-
apologize for that.
It's fine.
You know, are we on, could we go to the trade-offs slide 10? I apologize. Because there are a couple of points on here that are important. So on slide 10, again, you know, in a perfect world, we would help our customers reduce their arrearage and avoid disconnection. We would leverage external programs like the ones I described. We'd minimize our overall expenditure for bad debt write-offs and minimize sendbacks. But we do face a lot of constraints. First of all, you know, the outstanding SVCE balance is only a portion of what the customer owes for their energy bill more broadly, right? Because there's transmission and distribution, there's the PCIA, then of course there's their gas service. So that debt number that we see may only be a small portion of the picture, maybe 20-25% of what they owe overall. So there's only so much we can do to help. We have limited visibility to what a customer's overall debt is to PG&E. You know, our sources of funding are more limited. Many of the PG&E programs are recovered through public purpose charges, such as with AMP. And then I mentioned the fact that payments are applied first to PG&E's debt. This is for residential customers, and then to our debt. This is known as the payment waterfall. That waterfall was suspended. We're paid pro rata with PG&E now, but the waterfall is expected to continue or resume again this summer. So even if a customer is able to make some payments, you know, longer term, those may be coming to PG&E first. Okay, on to slide 11, the options. As I previously described, we could simply begin to resume our delinquent payment policy in the July timeframe. This would result in quite a few sendbacks, right? Several thousand sendbacks, but it would limit any further exposure we might have. Option 2, phased resumption. We could begin to notice customers and look for improvement in their payment over a 2 to 3 month period. So in other words, not do any sendbacks when we resume the policy in July for at least a couple of months to give customers that much longer to work themselves out. And during that time, we could certainly advertise to these customers the available programs that are out there. And the third option would be to do those two things and potentially add our own program, our own financial relief to the mix. And we'd have to figure out exactly how to do that, how to apply it. Ideally, it would be to customers that need it the most versus, say, a broader program for all care fair customers like what we did last time. So this is what we're interested in your feedback on. We, for option 3, have thought about the notion of $1 million or something on that order to help provide support if we want to go that path. And as Director Given mentioned at the outset, we would like to bring a similar presentation back to the board in May. And we can tighten it up from this based on your input. But we wouldn't look for a decision in May. We'd look for direction, and then we would bring a program for a vote in June. So that's the thinking here. And I will open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Don. Questions from the board to begin? Director Elahi?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Yeah, it is really complicated. People are suffering from debt because of COVID. And I guess, I don't know if it really makes this difference to a customer who hasn't been able to make payments, whether they're getting serviced by PG&E or by SVCE. It appears that PG&E has a policy which they will basically collect, and maybe, I have a few questions, and I'll try to give them to you. You can respond to all of them at the same time, maybe. One question was, when PG&E collects its portion, does it stop collection efforts? And does it stop doing the disconnect? Because now all they owe is SVCE. And I know now it's being paid pro rata, but that may come up. And when they send out notices, are they asking for the whole amount or just what is owed to them? The other question I had last time was, does returning a customer to PG&E affect the PCIA element that we end up paying? And if all the customers are returned to PG&E, when PG&E starts collecting, I assume they're also collecting for our back portion, and I assume that they will send that back to us. And then the other question, and I don't know if these are too many questions, Don. Let me know if you want me to stop and come back.
I'm scribbling down as fast as I can here. But, so please continue.
All right. And so if a customer is returned, and I guess these are tenants that are, or sometimes tenants that are being billed, and they return to PG&E, and eventually the PG&E shuts them off, and maybe there's a new customer at the same residence. Does that new customer who comes in automatically get by default become a SVCE customer or not, because that residence was returned? I assume it goes by the individual who's signing up, but not by the place. But I just wanted to get a clarification on that. And do you have any data on how many people actually catch up after they become delinquent? And I know this is COVID territory, and whatever data you might have had may be obsolete. But it would be helpful to understand that if you have, like 100 people are delinquent, and we work with them and work with them and work with them, but 90 days later, they either get disconnected and we never see them again, because that'll kind of tell us whether it's worth putting the effort to try to keep them. And I guess I've already asked this, but if PG&E threatens a shut off and they just pay the PG&E portion, do they keep getting electricity? Which means that we're not getting paid, but PG&E was getting paid. The notice, you gave us a couple of options on the immediate resumption. The option was that they get a notice if the balance is $100 or more. I'm not clear, is that a 30-day notice? Because I know on the other ones you have a 3-month notice. So those are some of my questions. I don't know if you got them all, but let's.
Well, I'll maybe I will click off the ones that were easiest. It's a great list of questions here. In terms of if a customer is returned to PG&E, and if that customer ultimately leaves PG&E service, maybe they move or they're disconnected, a new resident at that same address is automatically an SVCE customer unless they opt out. So when we return customers, it's not like we're returning the address, we're returning the customer. So that was pretty straightforward. If we return customers to PG&E, there is no impact to our PCIA payment, or the PCIA is paid based on customers paying their bill. The portion of that payment would go to PG&E. In terms of how many customers might catch, I'm sorry. An easier one here is, does PG&E, if we return a customer, continue to try to, in a sense, collect for us? The short answer there is yes. If a customer, after they're returned to PG&E, becomes current again and catches up and pays off that debt, including the debt from us, we are paid for that. So returning a customer to PG&E does not mean that we are writing off that money. We will see some of that money, assuming the customer can pay down the line. Your question on, how many customers that we return catch up. Yeah, great question, and maybe that's something we could endeavor to study, though we'd have to look at customers from before we terminated the send back process and maybe see if they're still with PG&E, which might be an indicator of that. But another thing we have noticed is, remember on one of the very first slides, we showed that there was about $2.5 million in indebtedness. That was just a very standard amount that we dealt with over the years at greater than 31 days. And when we operated our policy, we would wind up doing write-offs of about $500K a year. So maybe 20% of that plus 31-day balance is something that we would lose, and the remaining 80% we would ultimately be paid. So yeah, customers do catch up. And of course that policy was worked that way when we were doing the send backs. If we didn't, that percentage would have been higher. But and I probably didn't answer all your questions there, but any that I obviously missed?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I guess that was the last one, is an important analysis to make, because these are COVID customers and the debt is much higher.
And longer too. Yeah.
And their ability to catch up may be a little bit hard pressed. and they are really not suffering in a sense if they return to PG&E, because PG&E gives them all the required notices, tries to work with them, has their own payment plans and everything else. So we're not putting them on a higher burden, are we, when we return them to PG&E?
No, no, yeah, we could conceivably help, right, if we help them get current by providing some form of relief, but we don't harm them in any way, relative to disconnection by sending them back to PG&E.
And I think PG&E can provide the same relief that we might be able to provide, or maybe they other options. It appeared like they might even have extra options to help them out. And what are we required to do when we decide to return them? Are we supposed to give them a 30-day notice saying you're going to be returned, or do we just do it?
No, so our standard policy was that if a customer was more than $100 in arrears with us, and that $100 was greater than 90 days, we'd send them a notice saying you're in arrears and we're gonna disconnect you. If they were still in that status, the following month we'd send them another letter, and if they were still in that status a third time, we would send them a letter and effectively disconnect them shortly thereafter. So it was pretty much that greater than $100, greater than 150 days, that meant pretty much immediate disconnection, but they would have been noticed at least 2 times, 3 times, 3 times, although the third one was not with a whole lot of time after it before we did the send back.
But are we really disconnecting them, or are we just turning them over PG&E?
No, we are not disconnecting them. That's super important. We're sending them back to PG&E. We're opting them out,
Yeah, so
which basically means they can't accrue any more debt with us.
Shouldn't the notice say that rather than saying we're disconnecting you?
No, it doesn't. I didn't mean to say that if I did. It's a notice that says we will send them back to PG&E.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're not bothered, I guess. They're still going to get service, and by that time PG&E is probably sending them notices also.
Yes.
Yeah, they've not been able to take care of it.
Yeah, and if a customer is on a payment plan, we do see an indicator in the data that we get from PG&E. We will not terminate a customer that is we won't send back a customer that's on a payment plan and that is current on that payment plan. So yeah, there's a little grace in our policy, but
okay. Well, I mean, it sounds like it doesn't really make much of a difference to the customer. I mean, they'll save 1% by staying with us, but if they're not paying, they're saving 100%. So it probably doesn't make much difference as far as returning a customer to PG&E is concerned. It makes a big difference to us if the delinquencies are going to continue in the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you for answering those questions. I think it clarifies a lot. Appreciate it.
Okay.
And Director Tyson.
No, I lowered my hand because you accidentally answered something I was asking. Well, I shouldn't say accidentally, but anyway, yes. That was quite a list of questions, Director Elahi.
Yeah. So I have some along the same lines. I think when part of the question was if they go on a payment plan and just say that the customer owes $50 for gas and $20 for transmission and $5 for PCIA and then $30 for electricity. So where the question would be, does if the payment plan is doesn't cover all that, so does the gas bill get paid first, then the transmission and distribution get paid, then the PCI get paid, then we get a differential on electric power? What would be the sequence of that?
So my understanding, and I can ask PG&E again, but historically my understanding of this has been that the dollars apply evenly to gas and electricity at PG&E, right? You're making your payment against that utility bill, okay. and I believe it's applied, pro rata, if you will, on the
Process.
PG&E, yeah, on the PG&E side. But if that amount stops short of, paying off everything, the PG&E arrearage is covered first, and then the remaining dollars would come to us. And this has historically been true for residential customers. For commercial customers, it's been pro rata all along. So pro rata is and why that distinction was made historically, I'm not sure, but that's the way it's been.
Okay. And one last question is, if we return a customer to PG&E, and right now our normal flow is not so bad, but now with the volume of the number of customers we're speaking of, if they get returned to PG&E, what would allow them to come back to Silicon Valley Clean Energy? How would they re-engage with us?
So we've in effect opted them out. I don't think they can return to us for at least a year. So if, the same way as if a customer opts out, they can elect to come back to us for at least 12 months.
But they can after 12 months.
Yes, but they'd have to elect to do that, right? They would have to proactively want to come back to us.
It's not an opt-out policy.
Right. Yeah, it's not an auto return policy after 12 months. That'd be nice.
I was trying.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we'll go back to Director Tyson for some questions, and then Director Abikoga.
Very good, thank you. I was on the board of West Valley Community Services for quite a few years, and I'm still involved with them. And one of the things they do as a community service agency is provide food support and rent support and also utility bill support. And I'm just wondering, is there any part of that sequence, say when they're with us, that we direct them or alert them to assistance like that in helping pay for bills?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and the options 2 or 3 that we laid out, where we're really working to make sure our customers are aware of the options that exist out there for them. It would be good to have that kind of information presented along with the standard utility structures. So yeah, if and I think that would be, I think we should try to learn as much as we can about the REACH and I'm forgetting the other acronym right now, LIHEAP programs. REACH is sort of community oriented, like you talk about. It's a nonprofit. Money goes into a fund and then is basically given to customers that are in need. The funds are exhausted, and then the program starts up in the future when additional funds have been effectively donated for that purpose. So there could be an option here too to work with a third party like that, and maybe I don't want to get ahead of understanding whether this is an option or not, but almost having them administer something like that for us in a way, or to look at an option like that, because they're good at working with customers that truly are at the greatest need, and they're in the community doing exactly that. So.
And they tie it in with counseling and bills and budgeting and tax filing, tax returns, and other sorts of things. So you're not just say pointing at this one thing, but looking more at the bigger issue.
Your picture, yeah.
Thank you. Director Abikoga?
My question was along similar lines. I think I was interested in slide 8 in the customer relief programs, and was the question.
Margaret, excuse me, we can barely hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit closer to the mic would help.
This is better.
A little bit.
Huh. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
That's
okay?
better.
Okay,
That's
great. So my question is on slide 8. It's a similar question about the customer relief program. And seeing that out of the 2,200 or so, only 280 are enrolled, how can we get more of our customers enrolled in that program, and then the other programs? I guess my interest would be to try to, keep the customers if we can, and then just help them find ways, with these programs to get caught up on their payments.
So AMP is definitely an opportunity for us. And this is something that we've been talking with the other CCAs about. The program just went into place in February, and there were some concerns that it may actually be advantageous for a customer to sign up for this closer to June, just because they need to be able to make the payments on a regular basis under AMP to get that debt forgiven. And if they're still, maybe they just, were able to find employment again and they have other bills to pay off, it may be best for them to wait closer to when, disconnection is going to start to become a reality to get onto that AMP program. So, but I think the time is basically now and going forward to, we could work to message those customers directly. And we do know who the eligible customers are. We do have that information now from PG&E. And we can work with PG&E. It could be co-branded even, communications that we do to them through email or direct mail. But it's in everybody's best interest, I think at this point, to get those customers onto AMP, because it's, again, it's the program has a lot of benefits in that it does forgive debt if the customer can make a series of 12 payments. And I think you're entitled under the program to miss one or two. I can't remember the details, but certainly if you miss 3, you're kicked out of the program and then you're facing disconnection. So that's the reason why getting the timing started up has been something people have been thinking about. But as we draw closer and closer to June, it really makes sense to get people into this if they can.
Right. So looking at the options, I guess I was looking at 2 or 3, but then thinking if we're going to provide some financial assistance, is there like other ways of using that funding to get more people into these relief programs, instead of just having, us, I guess, providing the financial support? That make this, I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yes.
I guess I'm trying to understand better what the trade-offs between 2 and 3 are, and incorporating these relief programs. I don't know if that makes sense.
We can talk about that a little more during the discussion point, I think,
Okay.
because I think there's a lot of value in what you're saying in the big picture.
So options 2 and 3 did assume a similar level of effort applied to this second bullet of making customers aware of available programs. The only difference really between 2 and 3 was in 3, SVCE would contribute additional dollars to the mix. So we would create our own program of some sort to provide financial relief above and beyond what's available in the other programs that customers have.
Okay. Yes. And I guess what I'm trying to see, or trying to contemplate, is if we put in more more money into trying to get people signed up for these other relief programs? Is there a benefit to a cost benefit to that instead of just giving financial aid? But yeah, we can talk about it in the discussion. Thank you.
If there's no other questions, we can go to the public comment. I'll open the public comment portion of the meeting. Do we have anyone wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission to discuss a little bit more. I think Director Abikoga was striking a good note just then. I'll offer some structure thoughts to the presentation. I think that if, Don, if we look at, I'm going to call it an executive summary slide that basically says what it is we want out of this presentation, and then you can provide the detail. But you can have some bullets that just highlight, you know, our customer, our old budget of 500,000 a year went up to 150, and now we're talking 5 million. I think just a simple statement showing the challenge. I also think, you know, something simple that shows the numbers. So, and I can probably say more later, but I thought an initial slide that kind of summarized in a good old executive summary thing. And then the ending, of course, is where we want to end up. And my focus was that ultimately we want to get paid. Our goal is to get paid. And our secondary goal, I think, is to keep customers. So if that's our purpose, to get paid and keep customers, then that ties into what Margaret was getting at, which is how can we do those two things? And I heard you mention funding sources. I'm going to call it private. Then there's local, and then there's state, and then there's federal, and then ultimately there might be money from SVCE. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 sources of funding. And then how do we communicate? What do we do? But how do we communicate what our choices are that ultimately gets us paid and keeps our customers? And what I heard you're saying, which is I remember and be very excited about and have talked with people about, is the AMP program. Because if I followed you correctly, that program actually helps make us whole. So I think that's a really good thing. So Margaret, if your idea was rather than say, spend $100 on a customer, should we collectively spend, you know, a couple $100,000 on outreach and set up information on how to get, where you can go to get funding, what local programs are, and really do an outreach program?
Yes.
That's what we're heading towards?
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly it. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes to me, that makes a lot of sense. Because to me, it has the potential to have a win-win of getting us paid and keeping our customers in the long run. So one of the challenges would be to identify all the various sources. And Girish, I looked for it before the meeting and I couldn't find it. I thought I sent you some article on some federal program that was funding utility bills. They were funding rent and utility bills.
Yeah, I think that was the first stimulus program from the Biden administration, which, or maybe the second. And it was basically going to be sent to each of the, well, get sent to the state and cities. So one of our action items is to write a letter to cities to request that cities add that to their priority list in terms of communications too. So that was one. And I think, yeah, so
I think there's another one. I think there's another one that specifically says the money is to can go to rent and utilities. And it might be the one that's the rental program. The ARP program where the cities get money. One is cities are all budgeting now, and there's a high probability that cities won't have any money to help their residents pay utility bills. And time's kind of running out given the process that cities are going through. I'll look at my notes, and maybe you can, and see if there's it's just sticking in my brain that there was a special program I thought might help us get.
No, there is. It's more of the money can be used to pay utility bills. So utility bills was one of the
I see
accepted uses.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Anyway.
But we will follow up on that.
Okay, so that's where I was heading in terms of the presentation. There's a whole lot of good information. I think it would help the board as an audience to have this executive summary slide saying, you know, we've got this going on, this going on, this going on, and this is where we're ending up, and we can give you the backup. But and then the three options I think is good. But I think it would be helpful to have something as potential, if staff feels comfortable saying this, you may not, that the goal is to recognize the situation we're in and find a way to get paid, and then how to keep customers. And when you look to another point, which is when I looked at the accounts over 180 days, the 200 odd days, I mean, what realistically are we going to get paid back for that? You know, what's an assumption that we're realistically going to get that money back under any of these programs? To me, that's pretty limited. So that kind of assessment might make a difference on how people look at the solutions too. Okay, Director Elahi.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a difficult subject to try to do what's right by our customers and also do right by what our goals are, which is, you know, to keep customers and also get paid. But I would just say about keeping customers, our goal should be to keep customers who are paying, and customers who are not paying, not part of our goal. So keep them separate. The other thing I wanted to really understand, because whatever outreach we can do, we should do, and the AMP program is a great one. The funds that if we are to subsidize them at all, we're in fact going to be subsidizing PG&E, because PG&E is going to keep trying to collect, and if they don't have to pay us, the money they pay all goes to PG&E. We don't get a pro rata out of it because we're subsidizing our portion. And PG&E has the option to give them all the different, and I'm sure they're going to try to give them everything, all the information about where they can get additional help or whatever they can do. I assume they're doing that, and maybe Girish can answer that if PG&E notices, provide them with information as to where they can get subsidies and do other things. So my thought is probably keep the customer, anybody who's on a payment plan. So we know that they're trying to make it. Anybody who gets on the AMP plan, those are the customers we want to keep. But the customers that are not on a payment plan and they don't understand AMP at all, I mean, that seems like a fairly, you know, it's mana. I guess they shouldn't see it and say, okay, here somebody's giving. If they don't even get on that plan, they're eventually going to not pay at all. And we don't want to be doing a program where it just helps PG&E out and doesn't really help the customers any. So how you clarify it is probably some information as to what PG&E is providing these guys in notices, and information about outreaches and subsidies, and whether the notice we provide, whether we can provide some additional information that may help them, emphasizing on the AMP program, but then probably sending the customers back to PG&E if they're not already on a payment plan, maybe a clearer guideline and an easier decision to make at this time. Thank you.
Director Abikoga, any thoughts on where you were going earlier?
Oh, thank you. Yes, so I think that, I mean, I definitely want to keep customers but also get paid. And I hesitate on SVCEs providing financial assistance because I feel like that's us paying ourselves. And so that's where I was looking for, whether if we spend a little bit more money to publicize and somehow help folks get onto these other programs to pay us, like that would be the direction I would prefer to take.
That's, to be honest, it makes a lot of sense to me. Just speaking about that, that made a lot of sense to me.
That's where I am too. In fact, I was just curious to know what was staff expecting of us today? Were you just looking to see our general reactions to this? You weren't looking for us to say, choose plan 2 or which one? I don't think you were looking for that. Is that right?
Yeah, this has been a super conversation, and where this is going is exactly what we were hoping for, I think, which was what I'm hearing is that second bullet, if you will, under options 2 and 3 is really what you want to see expanded. And if we're going to, our first investment ought to be in making sure that our customers know every available option to them to get back on the right side of the utility bill, and that's going to benefit us, them, and PG&E.
I'm
want to stop short of a program of an additional outlay of money that would go directly to customers.
I'm sympathetic to their plight, as I gather we really all are. And then also we're in a little bit of a plight too with our recent rate changes, and we're running a deficit here. So I think the direction we're discussing, it sounds very, very practical and empathetic in the good balance.
So, I mean, based on the executive committee's input here, we could really we can do more in the way of an executive summary slide up front. Is a good suggestion. Maybe put some of this information in the back, or but try to get to a discussion of the options, but really expand this notion of providing information to our customers. And then it probably becomes more of, okay, if we do that, how soon do we disconnect customers? Do we do it right away, or do we give them a few months with this big dose of information before we really reinstitute the policy, and perhaps stop short of doing another relief program that would involve us spending money on customers or providing relief directly to customers.
Could you go back to the slide that has the customers, your multicolored columns with the dollar amounts on it? I think there were two slides that I thought were very informative. This one, and then the other slide that showed the dollar amount between the commercial and the residential. I thought that was informative.
So that
yes,
the colored bars, yeah, did show the residential and commercial.
Right. And the reason I thought that was an interesting slide was that it's the 210 day. I mean, I think you can probably have enough information to figure out, the volume, the dollar value of what that is. And it's just this bar here, exactly, you've got it here. So over 210 days, and there's $1.4 million. And I don't mean to sound harsh, but I think we do have to be practical. So if we implement a system or recommend a policy that says we will utilize some of our funding to help people figure out how to pay their utility bills. We really want to help people get caught up get solvent and all of that. And then how we implement that, which is what you just started to ask on, is how soon do we implement our old policy? To me, if somebody's been out for 210 days, I think they're more likely to go back to PG&E in the end of a 90 or 150 day, whatever it is, period. So I would look at some way of approaching anything that's, I'm just picking numbers reading this chart, anything 210 days or less, we can make a real effort to support and then initiate our policy, just say the 1st of July, but or maybe the 1st of October when our new fiscal year kicks in. But anyone that's from over 210, that we initiate our policy July 1st, so that we don't drag that one on. If those are the ones least likely to be able to get caught up and would go back to PG&E anyway, if I can say it that way. Does that make sense? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I think so. If you're asking me, yes.
Just my thinking. Director Elahi.
Yeah, I know it's a complicated issue, but if you're looking at trying to collect and give notices and people who are behind 90 days already, it'll still take us 90 days to return them. So I would just stick with, if they're on a planned payment right now or will get on, or as a result of our notices get on, then we keep them. And I think the outreach effort and the notices about sending them back can be done in parallel. So the same notice that says, if you don't take care of this, you will be returned to PG&E would also say, but here's some options you have that you should use. And if and we'll try to help you as much as possible, use those options. Just do it in parallel, so we don't have another 90 days that we wait, and then all the 90-day guys are now 180 days late. So I do think we need to move on it, and the people, as they start paying, will generally try to pay people who are, I guess it's the wheel that squeaks that's going to get paid first. So we do need to be ahead of the game in some ways rather than at the end, because and a lot of these people are really, unfortunately, not going to be able to pay or will move. I mean, it's probably, if they owe for 9 months and it's $300 average, so they owe like $3,000 in utility bills. I mean, that's a deposit they can make on a new house somewhere else and be able to move. So unfortunately, they'll probably move. So I would say give notices, look at the people who are already on a planned payment, provide all the information about AMP and other programs in the notice you send out, but start moving them towards a disconnect or go to PG&E during the time, by the time our notice is expired. Now, whether you give them 30 days notice or 90 days notice, I would, you guys can figure that out as to how much time they would need to get on a different plan, but we should do it in parallel.
I think it's a good conversation because Director Elahi and I have a different take on that. I think that there is things to be done in parallel, but I think the magnitude of the problem and the potential for solutions is there. So I'm willing to allow people to be up to a period of time, 150 days or whatever, before we start saying we're going to switch them back to PG&E. It's a judgment call. I'm a little more flexible on that point, but I think there's a cutoff point now where I totally agree with you, where the probability of people who owe thousands of dollars aren't going to be able to stay with pay up and stay with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. But I think it's very much what staff and Don was just asking about. So we're getting joined by Director Flygore. I don't know if she's been hearing enough to be able to say anything at this point. So, okay.
And I haven't heard enough, but I do want to underline the sentiment I think I hear from you, Chair Gibbons, which is to the extent we can, we should wait as long as possible to send them back because, you have to, as you all know, we think about the long-term user experience adoption for our customers. And we want to make sure that, just like with everything else happening right now, rent, leases, where landlords are working with a lot of renters, like they're doing their best to accommodate each person's situation. And so to the extent that we can work with them to reach a solution and a resolution that works well for them and keep them as customers, that should be our goal. And so I don't know, what, because the thing is, we don't want them in the end to have a bad experience. And one day, we obviously want them to say great things about SVCE and want to come back to SVCE down the road. So that is my biggest concern as I listen to this, that we really need to be very thoughtful about the notices and how we respond and treat our customers. And I'm sure you addressed this before I joined, but this is a very, as you can imagine, a very delicate situation on how we treat our customers. And we should be very thoughtful and be less methodical about it with things like this. So that's the only minor insight I wanted to add.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else have any other thoughts or summary comments that would help Dawn and staff prepare for this council discussion? I think it's been a very good discussion. We kind of really worked around the topics and the issues, and staff has heard, how we each think about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a discussion, and with that, we will move on to the next meeting agenda item, which I've got to switch my screen for. Let's see. Okay, so we are now on agenda item number 5, which is, the potential updates to Silicon Valley Clean Energy net energy metering policy, one of our favorite topics. Dawn, I guess this is you again, too.
It's me again. All right, if we can go to slide 2, please. So we're looking for your input today on a potential change to our annual cash out policy for solar customers that generate more solar than they use in a given year. About 10 to 15% of our solar customers are in that category. They generate more than they use. And we have a very rich annual cash out policy for those customers. A number of other CCAs started up with a similar policy and have moved to a policy that's less rich and more like what PG&E does. And we're suggesting that we do very much the same thing. And we'll describe some later, but that's the essence of what we're getting at here. If we do that, we will save on the order of $500,000 a year or more, and still have a NEM cash out policy that could be at least as good or better than PG&E. So next slide, please. So today, if a customer as of April, and this happens once a year in April, has a NEM credit balance that is more than $100, that balance is zeroed out and they are sent a check for the full retail value of that generation. And that generation has often been generated at 10 cents or more a kilowatt hour. We do cap the amount they can get at $5,000, but I'd say the average for residential customers, we'll talk about this in a minute, it's about $250 for customers that get this credit, just to give you a sense. PG&E has a different policy. As of the customer's annual true update, if a customer has over-generated kilowatt hours, they're paid about 2.7 cents for those kilowatt hours that they've over-generated, which is much less than what we pay with our policy. Next slide, please. So we set up this policy back in 2017 when we started up, and we modeled it after what Sonoma Clean Power had done and what Marin Clean Energy had done. And the reason that these customers were putting in place this rich NEM policy was that NEM customers were the ones, interesting enough, that were most likely to opt out. NEM customers pay a lot of attention to their bill. The way a NEM bill looks with a CCA versus PG&E is quite a bit different. And there are some differences just in how the accounting's done. So to make it really clear to NEM customers that we were in fact, as good or better of a deal, these policies were put in place that paid highly for over a generation. We see an opt-out rate on our NEM customers as of this day that's about 6% versus 4% in total, which again is really a surprise given how rich our policies are. Maybe it would have been worse if we hadn't done this well, but it's been very stable, over the last few years. I mean, we're sort of through the transition now. Then just another reference point here, we have close to 24,000 NEM accounts now. So, for residential customers, almost 1 in 10 is a solar customer. So really a significant number. Next slide, please. So this shows what our cash outs were in 2020. Again, about 13% of our NEM customers received a cash out payment. They had this surplus balance. For commercial customers, it averaged about $1,400. For residential customers, it averaged, as I mentioned earlier, about $250. And our total cash out payments across SVCE were about $800,000 last year. And what we're seeing for this year, April 2021, is a similar number, maybe slightly higher, but on the same order of magnitude. Next slide, please. So in terms of what's going on with NEM policy in general, there is a proceeding underway at the CPUC, the NEM 3.0 proceeding. It's been fairly widely recognized now that there is some degree of cost shift between NEM customers and non-NEM customers. In other words, there's some subsidization of NEM customers by non-NEM customers. The benefits of on-site solar have accrued more to wealthier or single-family homeowner customers than to other customers. This NEM 3.0 proceeding is looking for ways to make solar access more equitable across all segments of the population. And of course, there's interest in not hurting the growth of solar. And then in the industry, of course, is behind that, as are our other interests as well. So there certainly is going to be a bit more of a balance coming, I think, in NEM 3.0. The timing of changes associated with that would probably be next year or the following year in terms of it actually making its way into what our customers see. But this is something else that's going on as we speak. So what we're talking about with potentially making our cash outs a little less generous is probably directionally consistent with what may be coming in broader state policy. Next slide, please. So we looked at what the cash out payments were to customers by SEVI census tract quartile. Remember, we talked about this a few board meetings ago, but the SEVI 1 census tract quartile are the wealthiest census tracts, and SEVI 4 are the least wealthy. And what you see here is that, again, more of our cash out payments are going to the wealthier communities, the wealthier census tracts. On the commercial side of things, it's pretty much a wash. And again, SEVI doesn't generally mean quite as much if we're looking at commercial zones. In fact, they may be more in the SEVI 3 and SEVI 4 quartiles just by their nature. So we do see some of this same trend that a lot of our solar customers and benefits to solar are going more to single family and higher income areas. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, a number of other CCAs have recently changed their policy to go from a retail payout like we have to a net surplus compensation policy that PG&E has. I mentioned PG&E's payment is about 2.7 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's essentially the cost of electricity on the grid averaged during the day from 8 to 5 p.m. That's how that number is generated, and the number moves every month, but it's generally in that range. So 3CE to our south is paying about 2.5 times that net surplus compensation rate, or about 7 cents. Marin is now paying about 5.4 cents or 2x, and San Jose is paying about 1.25x, or a little over 3 cents. Sonoma Clean Power, you haven't seen enough options yet. They're paying 2 times the net surplus compensation rate, and they're adding a penny. East Bay is paying exactly what PG&E pays, the net surplus compensation rate, but for CareFira customers, low-income customers, they are cashing those customers out at full retail. So they're in a sense continuing the policy that we have today for low-income customers. And then they're adding another cent per kilowatt hour to those customers. PCE is where we are. They have not changed their policy yet. So you can see lots of different but related approaches here, and most everyone moving in this direction. So next slide, please. If we were to move to a net surplus based compensation policy, and if we were to pay at the same rate that PG&E pays, we would pay out $64,000 this year versus that $791,000 number. We would save over $700,000. If we paid it twice PG&E's net surplus rate, we would pay a little over $200,000, and we would save well over $500,000. We have about 1,000 CareFira customers that are NEM customers, and at average payout rate and the average number of NEM customers that get surplus compensation, if we were to say maintain CareFira customers on our current policy of retail compensation, that would be about $32,000 that would, in a sense, cost us on average each year. So remember those numbers, and we'll get to the punchline here, the last slide, which is a suggested change to the policy. So effective for next year, so this wouldn't be this year's April cash out, it would be the April 22 cash out. For all customers other than CareFira customers, we would pay 1.5 times the PG&E net surplus compensation rate, or about just a little over 4 cents at the current rate. And for CareFira customers, we keep them on the current retail-based annual cash out policy. And for customers with a cash out amount that's, this is getting real tactical here, but for customers that have a cash out that's greater than $50, we'd send them a check. If it's less than $50, we would just put it as a credit on their bill. And we would also use this method for NEM customers that leave us during the middle of the year. So we would, if they have a net positive surplus compensation balance, we would pay it using this formula. So if we were to do this, we would have a program that would remain more competitive than PG&E, 1.5 times the PG&E compensation. It would represent really no change for the 87% of our customers that don't generate excess solar. So remember, it's just dealing with those that do. And we would be retaining a generous cash out policy for Care for Your customers. So that's the suggested change, but we'll open it up to questions and discussion here.
I muted myself on that one. Thank you very much for the presentation, Don, and Director Tyson.
Thank you, Don. And I know the answer, but I'm going to still ask it anyway. This relates to annual excess electric production, not say monthly or anything like that. And the reason I asked that is about 2 weeks ago, I hit the time of the year where I'm net positive, but overall in the year, I'm one of those 87%. So just to clarify that, this is an annual NEM surplus.
Yes, so we do the snapshot, if you will, in April, because generally if someone has a positive balance, if they're from the April the year before, they have overgenerated for the year and they're now going into the sunny months. So generally a customer, if they're running a positive balance, they're overgenerating, or they have overgenerated as of April in the year, it's only going to get better when they go into the summer, because those are the sun months.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the NEM 3.0, I believe I heard on the TV news either yesterday or the day before, and the numbers I heard were something about a policy change, and instead of being paid 25 cents per kilowatt hour, I might be off with these numbers, people would be paid 12.5 cents. Is this relating to this NEM 3.0 that I just heard?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with those numbers. Yeah, I don't think numbers like that have been quoted, but
okay. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific about what I thought I heard. I guess I don't listen to the news as closely as I thought, but it seems to be perhaps in the general trend of people put up solar thinking there was one deal, and then as time goes by, the deal might need to get changed, and that's what you're presenting to us here today. And philosophically, it's not just being better than PG&E. Philosophically, is it because the amount of electricity that people are generating in excess is of less value to us than we thought it was? This is a tricky question, and I'm not even sure what I'm asking. But philosophically, why are we headed this direction?
we are overpaying customers for excess generation. We could go get that generation. Monica could and the procurement team could get more solar power for a lot less money than we're paying customers. That net surplus compensation rate is in the general range, at least, of what we would pay for solar power generally, but we've been paying a lot more than that. We've been paying a full retail rate, and remember, the net metering is still happening, using retail rates. We're not really changing how net metering works. It's just if at the end of the year you've generated more than you've used, we are lowering in a sense, the extra compensation for that.
And so to stay with my philosophical bent here, our trend in our commercial acquisitions are to go for more diversity of sources and to have solar with storage as a more valued form of clean energy. And so these retail people that are getting full retail value, they're not helping us in our grid the way the contracts we're seeking out now are. Is that a fair statement?
It's, yeah, it's fair. We have two programs now actually that we're offering that provide some support to customers that deploy storage along with solar, either applying a battery to existing solar or deploying new solar plus storage. Yeah, we very much like to encourage storage as opposed to just encouraging overgeneration of solar.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Director Flagor.
Thank you. And Director Tyson actually asked one of my questions because it wasn't clear to me after hearing the presentation why exactly we were doing this. If it was more to be more in line with PG&E, if it was to save money, but it sounds more like we're basically wasting money, and it's money we don't need to spend here. And so that's one of the reasons why we're changing the policy. I definitely support the direction of keeping the current policy for our care and FERA customers. I think I support that. I like that approach. I guess the only concern I have, again, going back to that original question about why we're doing this, I am concerned where, when we're selling SVCE and we're talking about SVCE and why customers should come to us over PG&E, it's a slippery slope if these distinguishing factors now start looking the same. And so if we're moving closer to the PG&E model, and I know we're still 1.5, I know we'll still be more competitive, but that's one of the things that concerns me. And I've heard this with maybe one or two other things too, where we look at what PG&E is doing, and so we may change what we're doing. We're still a little bit more competitive, but not as competitive, or to say, we're so different from PG&E. So that's my caution here, is we should always still try to be, that leader, and it's easy for customers to understand why they should choose us over PG&E. But your proposal, based on what we've seen and what other entities have done, I do support that approach conceptually.
One other thing I'd point out is there really isn't anything magic to the 1.5x. That could be 2x. It could be, you saw what all the other CCAs did. So to your point, Director Flagor, if 1.5 seems too close to PG&E as to really be any different, it could be 2x, and it wouldn't be an awful lot more money. It would be, our estimate was it would look like $200K. It would still save us over $500,000.
Right. And there are also benefits to using the same general formula as PG&E and the other CCAs, where customers can really compare apples to apples. But I agree. I think it's worth discussing whether or not the 1.5, and that was a great slide where you showed, how much we'd be saving depending on what that X amount is.
Thank you, Director Alahi, and then Director Abikoga.
Thank you. The one thing I don't know if I fully understood it. Right now we are what, at 5x the NSC, or was it 10 cents?
Well, it's hard to put an exact value on it because it's going to vary by customer. It's the retail value at which that that surplus was generated, and so it's going to depend what time of use rate or what rate. Yeah, I said 10 cents because that's going to be the ballpark that it would.
Yeah, just like we have a 1.5x, so that would be like a 4x or something, approximately.
Yeah.
And you said the net metering rate stays the same. So if they don't go above, are we still crediting them at the 4x, or are we going to be crediting them at the 1.5x?
The 4x at full retail. So NEM still works. Net energy metering still works at retail. It's only if you over generate and you're left over with this positive balance that we are paying you at, in effect, closer to a wholesale rate.
So is that something we should also discuss, whether that 4x should also come down to the 1x or 1.5x that is paid when we overgenerate, or are there any agreements that the people who have installed solar have?
It's just all NEM, that PG&E does, all NEM that, most all other CCAs do, does rely on this retail net metering concept. So that would be a very big switch. And
So PG&E,
probably,
PG&E also credits them with the 4x rate?
yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just the credit portion is where we have a difference, and that's what we're trying to adjust. Okay, I just want to get a clarification. But it's like they're already, the encouragement we want to give them to put solar on is already there because of the NEM credit they're getting.
Exactly.
So
exactly. This is just this is just saying we're not going to give you as much encouragement as we're giving you today to generate excess solar more than you need.
Yeah, understood. And I think it's good to catch this now, because as more people start putting solar up, the credits are going to go up, and you do want to go down gradually. So from a 4x to 1.5x makes is a better transition than if you end up saying 0x. So that's probably a good way to go. All right, I think your proposals makes sense now, and I appreciate you keeping the rates for the fair care. In fact, if there is extra money that becomes available, maybe we should increase that credit, and instead of just saying just costing us 32,000, that could cost us more, because in a sense we are subsidizing the rich guys right now, because they're the ones who have the households and the solar, and they don't really need it. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to take something away from them, that'll give us more flexibility to distribute it to the people who need it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Abikoga, we have a hand up by Girish. Would you like to say something right now?
Yeah, it may help with the question too. Don, could you talk about maybe net margin overall from NEM customers?
So, yeah. So I couldn't give you exact numbers, but yeah, SVCE at the end of the day will make less money on NEM customers than we make on other residential customers. And again, this has something to do with the retail net metering that we do. Girish, I'm not sure if that's exactly the question, but I don't have numbers at my fingertips about what it might be, but.
Yeah. Sorry to surprise you with that, but it kind of gets to some of the questions of, generally this is a very rich subsidy we have right now. So moving it down, and also given where we are with our finances, where the rest of the state is going, it just seems like this is the way to go to balance multiple objectives.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption, Director Abikoga. Your comment, please.
Oh, not at all. Thank you. I agree with the direction. I think we do have to be more mindful of our finances given everything going on, and in light of who's benefiting from this program the most. I would prefer to spend the funds to further some of our other programs that we have, and I was actually thinking though the 2x, just from marketing or whatever advertising perspective, sounds a little better than 1.5. So, and it's only still $200,000, and we save $500,000, I think. So, I would suggest we do that. But yeah, so I was thinking, well, gee, with $500,000, we could, put that into some other programs that could, maybe go further, and also be able to help the folks in the lower SEBI categories, and that's how I would like to use our funds. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's see. So we've had a presentation and questions. I have not had a public comment period. I'd like to open, Director Elahi, do you have more questions or would you like?
I just had one last question, I think.
Sure.
I think Girish or Don mentioned that we don't make money on these customers. And are we still making money or are we losing money on the customers is my question.
Yeah, I think we'll have to get to you with some math on that. But it's generally been understood that NEM customers, there isn't the same margin that there is with non-NEM customers.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I think that's the thing. That'll be good feedback because maybe these are the customers we should be returning to PG&E. We're not making money on that, you know. Keep the ones who need us, but return these guys.
You're taking words out of my mouth.
One of the reasons I'm being a little guarded on this is just this was absolutely the case a few years ago when a customer generating solar energy in the middle of the day was being paid a peak rate, and then during, say, the evening hours, the rate was less when they were using their power. The time of use rates have shifted a little bit. This is less of an issue than it was, but I think it's still generally an issue. So we just have to maybe do some back of the envelope math there. But.
And do we have an absolute right to return whoever we want to PG&E, or is that there's some factors on that?
We can return whoever we want. Yes.
So this will be a good thing to keep tabs on because we don't want to be subsidizing these customers. And so sorry, George, if that affects you.
But it's only to people that we pay money to. It's not to all our NEM customers. It's only to those that generate more than they use.
I think it affects all NEM customers because we're giving them a credit at 4 cents when we're only getting, when it costs us 2 cents. So it's affecting us across the board. And it affects us more for the NEM, and just generally the NEM entry customers. So some of them might be too small, but I think the whole thing has to be considered.
It'll be interesting to see what the Don can come up with numbers. I think that's a very good.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I will open the public hearing. We did have some correspondence from Bruce Carney on this, if you've all had a chance to just read that. And it would be relevant at the board discussion, I think, too. But anyone else wishing to speak or any other correspondence? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing and we'll come back to the discussion. And I'd like to sort of tie up a couple of thoughts, which are that I do think the time of use needs to be factored into this discussion for a lot of the reasons that Director Elahi just said. So are we making money? Are we losing money? And does time of use change any of that? I thought the argument made about should we be turning these back to PG&E was an interesting comment. I wondered the same thing. So some of your data will be helpful, Don. The concern I had was, I think what Director Flygore started off with is we do have to be sensitive to our reputation. And we don't want to be accused of dumping people back on PG&E. But we also want to be thoughtful about changing, because there's a big difference between paying 10 cents and a kilowatt versus paying 4.5 or 4 cents. So that's making me a little nervous. I would be much more comfortable about the discussion if I understood the financial margin issue that we're just bringing up. I wouldn't be so trepidatious about running the risk of people wanting to go back to PG&E or saying that you aren't honoring your previous agreements. So I think that'll be helpful. As far as changing the multiplier, I thought what Director Abicoga said, 2 sounds better than 1.5. So I would support something like that. If we go that way, I had some other notes, but they all come back to what the margin is. So, and in terms of the presentation, I thought I thought maybe on the slide on page, I've got new eyes, so I'm adjusting to new screens, new sizes here. It's I think it's slide 6 or 8. I can't tell which. I think you could probably just put it as NEEM cash out policies and just say that people can do, one is you do multipliers, and these are what the multipliers are. The other one, this one does a 1 cent, and this one does something. What concerns me with some of these is there's so much detail that what you're really trying to describe here is the range of what's being done. So you might find it beneficial just to think about it that way. That's just a thought on that one. Oops. And let's see. I thought the slide that talks about the SEVI quartile was an important one because it speaks to, and I went to a Haas energy class that had talks just about this. It's the that Don made about the inequity, the subsidizing of the wealthy people who can have the solar. So I think that that's an important discussion point in this, perhaps one of the more important ones. And is that really the problem we're trying to solve? What is the problem we're trying to solve? Yes, we're trying to solve the amount of money we're sending out. And that will only grow more likely as more solar systems come on and more people know that they can make money on it. But you know, what is it what's the inequity that's now becoming obvious? I think that's a very important point and slide. So your first bullet was cost shift from NEM customers to non-NEM customers. That's really an important point. So the only other comment I had was, is there, I said legacy customers, but I think I'm going to change my tune on that. Yeah. And I don't think we should subsidize commercial businesses, but I'm curious, my city has a lot of meters. So is there a difference for, what do you call it? Public agencies in any of these discussions versus commercial customers? Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Okay. All right, so those are my thoughts. And who else would like to comment? So Dawn or anyone, do you have any follow-up questions of the committee? Executive board? Have we given you information that isn't totally confusing?
No, again, this has been very helpful. I think when we come back to the full board, we'll use the 2x multiple. We will summarize a few of these slides as suggested. We will try to provide more of a number in terms of, you know, that 10 cents versus the 4 or 5 cents that we're suggesting, and then also talk about the margin associated with NEM customers more generally. Yeah, and I don't think we want to opt out NEM customers or opt anyone out unwillingly, but the you know, unless it's a, you know, the payment issue that we talked about earlier. Nonetheless, it is to understand that contextually, you know, as we talk about this, we are basically over incentivizing excess production right now. And I made a note of that. Someone I think was kind of talking about that issue. I think that's a very good summary point that we could almost begin this with.
Yeah, it's a good framing starting point.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And then with that, no action, no discussion is now moving on to item number 6. It is now 4:30 for anyone who has a time check. And this one is future remote work policy. And our director is going to cover this one.
Yeah, that would be yours truly. So we'll go to the next slide. And so I have a couple of slides kind of just telling you where we've been in the last couple of months. And then this presentation is about essentially initiating a discussion with the executive committee. And hopefully we'll have a couple of, we'll get input from you today. And we have some suggestions about next steps, but essentially it's around discussion and getting input, different maybe bookends, but it's all about discussion and maybe focusing on our interests as to what's worked well, areas where we may want to make changes. And so we'll go over that. So when the governor had the emergency order, we actually were on the second floor of our office. And now we moved to the third floor. We basically sent people home and said, more to be revealed. Right now, just go home, grab your stuff as much as you can. And then, including chairs, this and that. And then from a board perspective, we had emergency leave that was approved by the board. So that, at that point early on, people may have had to take like a couple of weeks off, etc. So we started that and we extended that benefit in September 2020. So we're all very grateful for that. And then in July 2020, when we realized that we are going to be in this in the long haul, and there wasn't any information really about a vaccine other than a vaccine was being worked on, we extended the duration of remote work first till January 2021, and then through September 2021 being 100% virtual, thinking that this gives people enough of a runway to plan their lives around a long-term pandemic. And again, here, not really knowing the details of the vaccine regimen. All right, so next slide. And during this time, we also maintained culture within SVCE, right? So when you think about, all of us have been moving to Zoom, but it's one thing, you have Zoom and then everything else you want to do to make sure that employees continue to be engaged through social activities. Haven't listed any here, but for example, we had one where we had a painting, a guided watercolor class. That was a 2-hour class where we all got together and did that. A number of social events, again by Zoom, over probably about 2 to 3 times a month. And we ended up hiring people during this pandemic. You approved a new budget during this pandemic. And in fact, just today, I got to see one of the new staff we hired and one of the new positions we created, our Director of Policy, Melissa Charles. I'm in the office here and she's down the hall in another office. And we also hired a new CFO and others. So we are kind of spread out over here. And as you can see, this is where we all kind of spread out in the Bay Area. And we have Melissa, who is closer to Sacramento. And we have one employee that we've hired who lives in Houston. And up in Idaho, we have a temporary employee there who's helping us on a project basis. So next slide. And as I go to that, we also, employees have taken during this pandemic, they have spent at times 1 to 3, 4 months and even longer outside of the Bay Area. And I think, you know, on the one hand, it's been an extremely productive period where I think we've been able to deliver on a variety of initiatives, but at the same time, it's also been a very stressful period. And you'll see a little bit about that. We've done some surveys of staff around this, and you'll see some of that. So as we're thinking about the future and looking about, I'd say, a steady state after a vaccine regimen is all of us have maybe herd immunity, and maybe at a time when we start to treat COVID-19 more like the common flu, what is that going to look like? And so you're thinking about it in terms of interests, safety, for sure. We want to look at retaining our employees, our current employees, and attracting new employees. This is one of the strategic focus areas that we've talked about, is to make sure that we have the right set of resources, and especially as we are going into a time period where we need to have a lot of sophisticated skills on the risk management side. We have 11 PPAs, the first of which will get into an operational mode in November of this year. We're going to go into a completely different mode of operating starting the end of the calendar year. So getting the right team together is going to be very important. Efficiency and effectiveness is another interest we all have, whether it's board efficiency and effectiveness and employee efficiency and effectiveness. You know, so thinking about any kind of future structure, we want to preserve the positives of remote work and this one-year experiment where the entire world got to work remotely. There were lots of positives on it, but there were also several identified negatives on it. So as we think about the future, how can we look at that? And just others, kind of a catch-all, you know, emission reductions is one of the things, and you'll see in our 2020 emissions as a whole, it's going to come down, but some of it has to do with less commuting and less transportation emissions, but all that will be changing in the coming months as the economy roars back. So let's go to the next slide. So we did a few surveys, and in August 2020, there was actually a very detailed survey we did. We got it from Morning Consult, and we used the same questions for all our employees. And so this is just a snapshot. There's a lot more detail in here. But essentially, here are kind of like the positives. But this is, again, very high level, that most of the folks found many positives of working remotely. And they also found negatives of working remotely. So it's not a straightforward kind of problem to solve. And then more recently, just as we were thinking about bringing this back to you for discussion, we know that Governor Newsom has announced California is going to be open in June. And people are starting to get vaccinations. And, you know, employees talk about, I've got my first shot, second shot, whatever. So let's get input from our employees again. So let's go to the next slide. So this wasn't really a survey, it was more through meetings, and we had each director talk to their employees. And one of the things I wanted to do before coming to talk to you is make sure we heard from every employee, so I could get their assistance and help in structuring how I'm presenting this to you. So common feedback was also how are in-person requirements going to be managed? Is it going to be by role, by group? Is it going to be a one size fits all? How do you work with a mix of staff who may be remote and in person? How does that work? Can we, if we are going to come in to work on some days of the week or month, can we restructure the way we do work so we have more collaborative time during those days? Another thing that was quite important was, let's start slow. Let's not rush into this. Let's phase any kind of re-entry into the workforce, especially face-to-face. And everyone was very appreciative of being asked for their input and this not being a top-down directive for them. Next slide. So we also have state laws and emergency orders. So I've talked to our general counsel, Greg Stepanisic, about this, and he's keeping a close eye on what's happening. And as of my discussion with him this morning, we still don't have clarity on how changes or lifting of the emergency order is going to impact Brown Act requirements. And I'm sure all of you in your city councils will also be looking at that. So we'll continue to monitor that and then bring this to you because, you know, obviously, whatever the law says, we'll make sure that we are implementing that for our board meetings. Okay, so next slide. So our thinking right now is first, since we had already announced, since I had announced and told staff that they can work 100% remote through September 30th. And if we had got back to a steady state before September 30th, we'll work out something in the transition. So our thinking right now is continue to work remotely through September 30th. But if there is any in-person work, it should be voluntary. There shouldn't be a requirement to meet in person, and maintain teleconference and video conference options. We're also thinking when we start with a quote of baby steps coming back, and start with maybe some social events where we get people back in an outdoor setting just so we can see each other. And I can tell you just in this last week, being in the office and seeing Kevin and Nick and Jessica and now Melissa, and it's phenomenal. And Lisa today is just seeing people in 3D is great. But we want to keep it small. We want to, there are continue to be concerns about safety. So we want to have these protocols when people come back too. Next slide. After October 1, transition to a hybrid structure, but phase that in. It's kind of like, let's try something out. It's almost like piloting it, assess the situation, talk to the board, see how the board is assessing it in the sense how you're getting provided information, but also from an employee standpoint, how they're feeling about it. And there may be varying protocols, not a one size fits all, you know, whether it's board meetings, committee meetings, external stakeholder events, and just the day-to-day work. They may all require some thoughtful approaches. And I basically think that it would take more work, but I definitely think returning to the pre-pandemic 5 days a week at work is not the baseline we should be looking at for many of the reasons that I've talked about so far. So the last slide. So we want to get your input, get as much input on a broad side, you know, broad direction, but even any specific input you may have would be great. So here are some suggestions, maybe another meeting with you in May, or maybe a kickoff with committees or the entire board in May, additional employee discussions and through surveys, and then continue the dialogue with you to come up with something that continues with good employee satisfaction and engagement and board satisfaction and engagement too. So with that, I will end my presentation, be open for questions.
Thank you, Girish. discussions, questions, I should say first. Any questions first? Okay. All right, I have lots of discussion, but no questions. Do we have any comments from the public? I'll open the public hearing portion of the meeting. Seeing none, I didn't see any. We will close the public hearing and bring the discussion back to the board. So does anyone have any comment? Director Tyson.
This sounds like a reasonable, thoughtful approach. I think we're going to sort of feel our way and see how other things work. I definitely see a lot of the dislocation effects of people not being able to be in the same room, but there's a certain convenience factor here too for like this meeting right now. That we're not having to face Friday afternoon traffic in hopefully very few minutes when this meeting ends. So it seems thoughtful and reasonable, and I think you've built enough flexibility in for it to work.
Director Abikoga.
Thank you. So I'm all for this. I think, and I think it is a thoughtful approach with the transition. But personally, I don't want to go back to the way it was, especially with traffic and so forth. But also from an environmental perspective, part of during this time to COVID time, we've been was part of a task force on how to encourage more remote work to just basically reduce traffic and traffic congestion for better and cleaner air. So I think that's one of, in terms of our mission, it aligns with that well. But I think we're just in a different world now. And for all of the reasons that Girish outlined, we do have to operate differently and be more flexible. And so I think this is a good approach. So thank you, Girish, for your proposal.
Thank you. Director Alahi.
Thank you. Yeah, Girish, you're like Captain Kirk, you're taking us where no starship has ever gone before, which is going back to pre-COVID times, and that hasn't happened before. So thank you for all the considerations you've given it, trying to balance it with getting people back. Getting people back is basically a bonding thing. When you're there, you see somebody face to face. It creates a different thing. I think in some ways we've been lucky that we knew each other pre-pandemic, and we have a better appreciation of each other. People who only meet through Zoom are not going to quite get there, and you need to get them there also as you go along. And obviously the biggest consideration is going to be, are you going to lose some people? Because right now for some it's very convenient doing it on Zoom compared to either because they're too far or just because the traffic is horrible. If it gets there, nobody wants to drive. So that's an important consideration. And I think you're fully aware of that and planning appropriately. One question I wanted to ask you, you've got a much bigger building now on the third floor, and you're probably not using substantial or some part of it. Maybe there should be some consideration if you're going to not have people come back to subletting some portion of that, so we can get some of our funds back on that, or getting something else done. So that I would just throw that out as one of the things you should be considering.
Yeah, we will look into that. Director Gibbons was able to spend several hours here last week, so she knows, though it is larger than our second floor office, it's not really a very large space.
It's not excessive. It'll be interesting to see how it flows together. Any other questions or comments, I should say? All right. I'm sure some of you have seen some of these Indiana Jones movies where he has to put his arm in the hole, not knowing whether he's going to have his arm chopped off or not. So I'm going to stick my arm in the hole expecting it to be chopped off. Koresh caught me completely off guard on this because I'm fine with the transition. I perfectly well understand that it's going to take time to figure out how to get out from underneath this pandemic and get people comfortable and all of that. I really expected we would go back maybe 18 months from now or whatever. I clearly expected we would go back to more or less a 4 or 5 day work week. And I felt that was really important because, as Director Elahi just said, the culture of the organization has been built on relationships. Those of us that have been around for a while know staff. And we were encouraged at that point even to stay after meetings and after board meetings and whatever to get to know staff and meet staff. So there was a real culture of the board. And I appreciate that Girish has done all of this surveying of the staff. But it's the board's important in these discussions. And I told him I felt very left out of these discussions. So we're starting it now. I'm very torn. You see the geographic placement of staff, and like Mel being in Sacramento makes sense because of what she's doing, the lobbying. But does that mean that we should have other people who can't come into the office because of logistics? And then you get into the discussion of the skill sets. We have a very challenging technical business that we're all need to have the right people. So to me, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge of not having the ability to lean over the fence and have a conversation and know people, have the board know the staff, and all of that. I will say from my perspective, I said at the beginning of the meeting here, I average 60 plus hours on Zoom every month, okay? And that doesn't include all the incidentals. Those are actual commitments. I find Zoom completely dysfunctional in terms of having good dialogues, getting to know people, chatting about people's kids before the meeting or going out to dinner after the meeting. I do not find a culture that can be established via Zoom. So I realize that's my personal experience with it, but I really don't like it. Meetings like this, small groups like this, you can make it work. But I don't understand how an office, which is so complex in its functioning, can function over Zoom or something similar. I mean, I personally feel like it's been a complete compromise for me. I don't think this has been a particularly successful year in terms of how my city's operated, or the ABAG meetings. The ABAG meetings have been just, I mean, it's like being railroaded by a core group of people, and the rest of us just are barely hanging on. So I just have a really bad sense of how this structure would work in an everyday office environment. So I just put my arm in the hole and see what happens. But I'm really struggling. I totally get the transition for the next 12, 18 months. Totally no problem whatsoever with that. The long picture, I am struggling with. The good news for all of you is I'm only here another 18 months. So people may think of things and be of a different generation than I am, but I'm uncomfortable. I'm old-fashioned. I'm uncomfortable. Girish.
Yeah, thank you. I think your distinction of 12 to 18 months in transition and long-term is good, because on the one hand, I think we need to hear from the board on both through discussions. Because when you're recruiting, and that was something that Java talked about, I'll almost guarantee you that we're going to have issues with recruiting if we did not have a flexible policy. It is, you just have to see the culture of Silicon Valley. It's what all our neighboring companies are doing. I would say those who are looking at coming back to 4 or 5 days, I would say that's less than 1%. It's almost like the extreme example. Pretty much everyone's looking at long-term having something like 3-ish days or so with pilot programs to figure out what works. I also strongly believe that what we did in the last year of going 100% remote is unworkable. You can't do that. It really has to be something else that we design for a future world where it's not just us who may be hybrid, others are hybrid too. And how do we design something that's going to be very effective? So I think, you know, some of it we can experiment with over the next 12 to 18 months. And yeah, so appreciate the comments so far. So.
Any other thoughts? Seeing none, we will offer you that. Oh, Director Elahi? You're on mute.
Chair Gibbons, I agree with your thoughts and your frustrations, because I think that's, we're all becoming 2Ds in a sense instead of being 3Ds, as Girish mentioned. And we do need to get out of that and figure out how to do it. And that's a challenge. That's why I said Girish was going to go where no spaceship has gone before, and figure this out for all of us. And living in Silicon Valley, it's a little bit different. But we do need to have bonding experiences where we see each other. I mean, I know when I joined this board, the best thing sometimes I got was with Howard Miller out in the parking lot discussing things for half an hour after the meeting was over as to what it really means, and got a lot out of it. And we can't do that anymore. So I think that's what we need to figure out. So thank you for your comments, Chair Gibbons. That was very helpful.
You're most welcome. You usually hear from me. All right. Before we close the meeting, I had one leftover thought, which is on the customers' payments. I realized after I was talking about the 210 days that we really have a criteria of $100 in 3 months. Probably a criteria could be changed to, I'm just picking numbers, $5 over 6 months, and then that getting people back. That's some kind of a measurement that would not start the process up right at the end of COVID, because I think it's hard to adjust to. So the last minute, 30-second comment. Anything else before we close the meeting and let everybody go home? And Director Tyson, I'll make it before 5 o'clock. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.